Is this not the cutest bottle you've ever seen? It's adorable. Well, if you can't tell what this is, it's sake. And where does sake come from? That's right, Japan. So, we're going all over the world in this series. Last week was West Africa, and I thought it was a good idea to continue east, bypassing a large majority of the world, but I wanted to go to Japan because I have been thinking about this technique and dish that we're making today for a long time. It's actually something that I learned of relatively recently, but I thought it was so cool. It's such a great idea that I wanted to bring it into this series. The history is relatively bare. Maybe a couple minutes of things to talk about. Part of the problem is that this is Japanese history, and this technique is relatively well known in Japan, but outside of Japan, it's just absolutely just not used. So most history and most of the writing about it is in Japanese, and a few of the articles and write-ups that I found about it were either written by people that aren't Japanese or written in very broken English, so it was hard to kind of pick apart stuff to talk about. But there is some interesting stuff to bring up, and we will do that now. So, we are in Japan. The first thing you might be thinking is sushi. Well, that's a good guess. I'm sure we will get to that another day. Sushi is a very difficult one, and I want to make sure that I do it justice, so we're waiting on that. But there are some other interesting things that can be done with Japanese food. And this one is a little more obscure, but you might recognize some of the ingredients. When we think of seaweed, we probably think of sushi, which is fair. Most maki rolls, which is really an Americanized sushi, it wasn't invented in Japan. It was invented in California, hence the California roll. But the seaweed that's used for sushi is different than the one we're going to be talking about today. The seaweed in sushi is called nori. It's very thin and good for wrapping things. Today's seaweed is kombu, or kelp. Kombu is just the Japanese word for kelp, if you didn't know that. So, today's dish is not actually a specific dish from Japan, but rather a technique that has evolved over time, and I just think is absolutely fascinating. So what is it? I have to move the whole, I do the little reveals. I have to move the whole cutting board today. This just looks like some plates of food, but the technique that goes into making these dishes is kobushime. Kobushime means kelp tightening or kelp wrapping. So again, kombu or kobu is kelp, and then shime is wrapping or tightening. So what I have in front of us is two different dishes that I use the kobushime technique to create. This one here is a cod. This one here is a cod. I can't say that word. This one here is a cod sashimi. I cut the cod very thin, and we preserved it in kombu, and I'll show you how to do that. The one over here is chicken thighs preserved in kombu, as well as the vegetables that go with it. So, why kobushime? I mean, how did it come to be? So kobushime is a technique that involves taking layers of kombu and putting usually fish, but vegetables and tofu are also very common, but putting them in between those layers and then setting them aside to preserve. It's not used outside of Japan, maybe China as well, but it's not used outside of Asia. However, there are ways of preserving in the Western world as well. One of the very common, most common even, is probably using salt. We'll probably do that in a later episode, but something like lox. If you've ever had salmon that's been cured in salt, lox, maybe you've had it on a bagel. It is a similar idea where you are using layers of salt, the salmon, and then a layer of salt over the top. The salt draws out the moisture from the salmon, which helps to preserve it for a longer period of time. Was used for centuries before refrigeration was ever an option. So this does the same exact thing. The kombu is very briny. I mean, it's growing in the Japan Sea and in the Pacific as well. But it has this very briny, oceany flavor to it if you just eat it by itself. And you can put protein in the middle of that, or vegetables in the middle of those, and set it aside, and it will actually cure the fish, chicken, whatever it is that you preserved. So that's what I did today. It's very cool and it tastes amazing. Basically, you're taking, you'll see in the video, but the cod is very, very flaky and soft. But when you cure it, it actually stiffens up a little bit, and you can bend it and move it without it falling to pieces. And it takes out some of the moisture and adds a different texture, and also adds a different flavor. So one of the things that's special about kombu is it has this layer of glutamates on the outside. It's this dusty white looking stuff on the outside, and when that comes into contact with the moisture that's being sucked out of the protein or vegetables, it actually enhances the savory flavor of the dish. The savory flavor in Japan is called umami, which I would say is actually a little more complex than just being savory, but that's the easiest English translation. Umami is something you might hear people say, and it's a ridiculous word. It sounds silly, but it sounds silly to say in English, but it is just this amazing, rich, complex, savory flavor, and the kombu helps heighten those flavors in the fish, in the chicken, in the beef, veggies, everything. So it's not only preserving, but adding new depth and flavor, and that is why kobushime is so cool. And this has been done for centuries, and it is all thanks to the harvesting, farming, and trade of kombu. So kobushime and the harvesting of kombu used to do kobushime comes from the Toyama prefecture centuries ago. The Toyama prefecture is kind of in the middle of mainland Japan along the coast. I'm going to provide a map to help locate some of these places, but they were big in kombu farming, and that's where most of the trade came from. So during the Edo period, which is early 1600s to mid to late 1800s, shipping vessels became a lot more frequent. And since Japan is so long and thin and made up of multiple islands, shipping things over the water was incredibly efficient to hit port-side towns. And these shipping vessels would start up in Hokkaido, which is the prefecture that basically makes up the large island that's above mainland Japan. Again, I'm going to show you a map. But these shipping vessels would come back down from port cities in Hokkaido, and they'd be selling all sorts of things, such as fish, red herring, things like that. And they would be going down the coast. They'd pick up kombu in the Toyama prefecture and take it to different port-side towns along the Japanese coast, into big cities that we might know, like Osaka or Nagasaki or Okinawa. All these places would be part of this trade of kombu, and then it would head back up to Hokkaido. It has a pretty long shelf life, so it's perfect for transport. During the Edo period, this shipment of kombu was so popular, it became a very important staple throughout Japan, not just in the Toyama prefecture, that the shipping route for kombu ended up being known as the Kombu Road. I don't know if this is a play on of the Silk Road from centuries before, but that's the idea. I feel like it is because it's not actually a road. I mean, this is waterway shipping. They're not using any roads. So I feel like it's a play on, but it's called the Kombu Road, and it is what popularized kombu throughout the majority of Japan. So with this great way of preserving food and no great way of refrigerating food, obviously, it became a very popular way to keep fish stable, just like you would if you were preserving something or pickling something in the Western world. So again, that's not a whole lot of history, but I hope you learned something new. We're gonna move on to the recipes. It looks complicated from just what you can see now. I promise you it is so easy, and if you serve this as an appetizer at your next get together, you are gonna look like a culinary genius. So let's get into the recipe, and I hope you enjoy. Okay, so a lot of this is totally optional. It really depends on what you want to cure in kombu. It doesn't have to be any of the things I make, or it can be all of them. One of the things I wanted to cure was some vegetables, so I'm gonna start by just blanching them real quick. I'm going to blanch the spinach for 30 seconds and the broccolini for about 1 minute. So the big star of this is going to be this whitefish. I have some cod. Any whitefish you can find will also do very well with this. Salmon is also a great choice. I know commonly they'll use red snapper, but whatever fish you can find that is relatively soft. So to do this, I'm going to be cutting them into sashimi, or very thinly sliced pieces of fish, and you want to do this on a very heavy angle. So as you see, I'm showing you here the basic motion you want to make. You want to try to keep your motions long, from the base of your knife up to the tip. Try not to saw at the fish too much, but rather do very long strokes. And you're going to cut them as thin as possible. You can use your hand to kind of guide the angle that you want to cut. It's really simple. It just might take a few times to get exactly the right technique, but any size and any shape is okay. It's just a matter of how uniform you can get it. So here is the real part of the technique, the kobushime. So what I'm using is some kombu that I got this at Whole Foods. You can get it on Amazon or plenty of places online. I actually think that it would probably be better if you can get longer sheets of kombu. These were a little small. Whatever you can find is going to work. So basically I'm going to lay it in a casserole dish all the way across, and then I'm going to line the fish on top of that. Cover the entire bottom of the casserole dish. You don't want to leave any extra space. But before we put the fish into the kombu, we are actually going to add 2 extra steps. First of all, you need to season your ingredients with salt. Absolutely important. And then I'm going to use the sake to brush onto the fish to impart a nice rice wine sake flavor that just adds a little extra something. I really recommend it. It's not necessary, but it's totally optional, but I think that you should, if you're going to go through this whole process, you might as well. So I'm going to brush one side of it with sake and season with salt, and then I'm going to place it into the casserole dish on the other side so I can season the fish when it's already in the casserole dish. And I have some more, so I'm going to do 2 layers of the kobushime. You can do as many layers as your casserole dish can allow and how much kombu you have. I'd recommend if you're doing more than just fish, if you're doing chicken and vegetables too, to do them in different dishes just to keep cross-contamination from occurring. So as you can see, the kombu is very dry right now, and you can see that layer of powder on top. That is the glutamates that I talked about earlier. As this sits, it's going to absorb a lot of moisture from the fish. I'm going to wrap it in plastic wrap, and then I'm going to place something heavy on top to make sure that the kombu keeps contact with the surface of the fish. And of course I'm going to do the same thing with the vegetables. And I also have chicken that I did the exact same thing to. I forgot to film it, but I think you get the idea. And I'm going to put these in the fridge for about 6 hours. You could do the chicken or vegetables overnight, but the fish, I think 6 hours is probably just enough. If you do more than that, it's going to start to get a little rubbery, kind of like a gummy bear. And that's not too nice. So once they're done, I'm going to take them out of the casserole dish. And here's the chicken. I am going to do an extra step with these. Again, this is totally optional. You could just bake it as it is, but I'm actually going to wrap it up in these pieces of kombu and bake them in the kombu to help kind of steam the chicken and add more of that kombu flavor. It's absolutely amazing. I recommend doing it this way, but it's not necessary. So it's dried out a little bit on the surface, which means that it's nice. It's been nice and cured. But when I wrap it in the kombu and bake it that way, the kombu is going to kind of steam the inside of the chicken and help it preserve a lot of the inner moisture. And it doesn't have to be perfect. This is why if you have larger pieces of kombu, this is a lot easier. But I'm really kind of doing a patchwork job here just because that's the type of kombu I have. It really isn't a big deal either way. It's just kind of nice to add a little extra flavor. And I'm going to bake those in the oven on 425 degrees for about 30 minutes until they're 165 degrees in the largest part. And while those are baking, I'm going to make 2 condiments for the side. Again, optional, but I highly recommend it. I'm going to use some of the vegetables that I cured for green sauce. This is going to be 2 to 3 stalks of broccolini that have been cured in kombu, as well as about 1/4 cup of spinach, also cured in kombu. And I'm going to add to that 2 cloves of smashed garlic. You don't need to chop it because it's going in a blender. And to that, I'm going to add the juice of half of a lemon. And then I'm eyeballing this, but I'd say about 1/4 cup of neutral tasting oil, or until it's just enough to help blend. And then I'm going to blend it until smooth and vibrant green. Optional, but I'm running it through a fine mesh sieve just to make sure that it's as smooth as possible. I mean, look how beautiful and green that is. And it's going to have so much flavor from the kobushime technique. It's so good, rich, and velvety. And we're also going to make a ponzu sauce. This is just a citrus and soy sauce. So I need the juice of 1 orange and half of a lemon. I'm going to add to that about 1/4 cup to half of a cup of soy sauce, depending on your taste. And about 2 tablespoons of rice wine vinegar. And maybe another tablespoon of water to loosen it up. It really depends on what you like. And then I'm going to put those into some serving dishes and add just a sprinkle of sesame seeds and chili flakes to the top. The chicken is done cooking now. I'm just going to show you how well this kombu does at keeping it at keeping the chicken thigh moist. It is so amazing. I really recommend trying it this way. And here is the fish, the cod, after it has been cured. You can see that it's not quite as flaky and soft as it was before. It's gained a lot more texture. So now I'm just plating up our dishes. On this one I have the chicken thigh cooked in kombu, as well as some of the cured vegetables. I just also had a chili sauce, a chili garlic sauce, store-bought. I thought it looked really nice, tastes really great with this, and then some broccoli microgreens. Maybe a little extra, but super good. And then finishing it off with our ponzu sauce as a side. And then for the other one, yeah, I know it's a little extra still, but I'm going to put a pastry ring in the middle, and I'm going to add some of our green kobushime sauce. And then I'm going to just shingle the sashimi around the outside, just to kind of make it decorative. You can do it however you want, but I see this as an appetizer, so you might as well display it as such. And I have some preserved lemons here just from another project I was working on. I thought they'd taste really good with this, just a little citrus and salty taste. Unnecessary, but really good. Some more chili paste on this. Top it with some broccoli microgreens. And there we have our cod sashimi cured in kombu. I mean, this stuff is so good. It adds so much flavor, and it really isn't that hard. I really recommend trying this. And now you too can be part of the Kombu Road. Thank you for watching this video. Check out some of my other ones for awesome food history and cool recipes.